to Tezuka Productions that they let us translate the Phoenix,
Mm.
and we wound up meeting Tezuka, and then we did translate 5 volumes, and that was the first work that I actually translated, but it wasn't published. It took 25 years to get that published.
Wow. Why did
Yeah.
it take so long for it to get?
Uh, in America, people just were not interested in Japanese comics then.
Mm.
And, it's totally different than today. Now, American kids, everybody knows manga, anime, that sort of thing. And in 1977, 1978, most Americans were still not eating sushi. It was just a totally different world.
Yeah.
So we didn't have any luck getting that published.
Welcome to Tokyo Alumni Podcast, episode 93. Today's guest sat in the ASIJ classrooms back in the 1960s and went on to become one of the godfathers of English language manga translation. Fred Schodt wrote Manga, the book that introduced manga to the West, along with Dreamland Japan and Inside the Robot Kingdom. He translated Astro Boy, Phoenix, Hadashi no Gen, that many of us ASIJers read back in school, and he knew Tezuka personally. Fred, it's an honor to have you on.
Thank you. And I think the introduction was a little exaggerated, but that's okay. I was just one of many translators on again, I should mention that. So,
No, you're
and I'm
being
sorry.
very.
I, no, no, no. And I think my introduction is overblown. But anyway, it's great to meet you, and great to see that you're living just across the bay from me right now.
This is not real.
Yeah.
I'm just copying you here. But yeah, again, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Quite the career. So I was thinking about this all day today, how we'll start, what angle we'll go with. But I think what makes the most sense, kind of giving the podcast theme, is kind of starting with ASIJ, starting with sort of your international background. You'd lived already in various places prior to going to ASIJ and prior to getting to Japan. I think it was Norway and Australia. But what made Japan so special? Because you'd only spent 2 years there, right, during your youth, yet you
Yeah,
returned.
maybe 2.5. Yeah. Um, well, for me, I mean, I'm sure you can imagine that going to Japan in 1965 from Australia is totally, totally different environment. When I was in Australia, we lived in the capital of Australia in Canberra, and the population in the beginning, I think, was 58,000 people.
Mm. Wow.
And maybe you had, I don't know, 18 million people in Australia, the size of the United States. And then
Mm.
uh, went from Canberra, and we arrived in Yokohama by ship, and and moved we went to downtown Tokyo to stay in a hotel for a while, and here's this city that has almost the same population as Australia. It's just incredible. So it was a huge change. In Australia, I had a horse and a dog, and
Mm.
I had a 22. I mean, it was just a totally different life. So it was very different.
You know how like Japan, even today, is so different from the 2000s and 90s. But my father actually has a somewhat similar background to him going to Japan for the first time a little later in the 70s. But he just tells me how it was so different being like a non-Japanese person back then. So what was it like being like a foreigner in Japan in the 60s?
Well, when I arrived in 1965, uh, I was thinking about it the other day. Because I'm actually writing a little essay right now, and I refer to Japan in the 1960s a little bit. And of course, Japan was in 1965, the Olympics were over, and Japan was definitely on track. It was about to become the economic miracle and so forth and so on. But people were still pretty poor,
Mm.
and it was very different than now. There wasn't. There were a lot more young people. That was one thing I was thinking about the other day. The population, the ratio of, say, people under 40 was much, much higher than it is today in Japan.
Mm.
And that had a lot of effects because there was a lot of energy in Japan. even though people they didn't yet have a lot of money, and there were a lot of things that were very different from, say, the United States or other industrialized companies. But there was a lot of energy, and young people were part of that, and there was a lot of political energy as well. So I remember we arrived in Tokyo, and we were staying very briefly, I think, in the Hotel New Japan, which is gone now. I think it was burned down. But I remember stepping outside of the hotel when we'd first arrived, and there was this huge demonstration going on because there was a lot of political activity in Japan, and the students were very rebellious, and there were all kinds of things happening. But I'd never seen this just mass demonstration. So that was quite made an impression on me. Yeah, and
Do
it was
you?
a totally different environment. People
Mhm.
didn't speak English, but there were a lot of people who wanted to learn English. So you'd walk around in Tokyo and get on the trains, and actually it was exhausting because people would come up and they wanted to speak English. They wanted to learn English. They wanted free English lessons, basically.
Yeah.
So you'd just be standing around and people would come up and they say, may I speak English with you? They were whatever they learned from their textbook, the one
Yeah,
line. And then, I mean, it was kind of cute, but it was also exhausting.
yeah. It's
And now it's actually wonderful. I go to Tokyo, and I'm probably like you. I'm basically bilingual, and it's so comfortable because people are so much more used to foreigners, and they'll speak Japanese with me now. And it used to be very difficult to get people to speak Japanese to me. I started studying Japanese quite quickly, and then I basically wanted to get out. And I was lucky to be able to get into the UCB Year Abroad program. And I
Mm,
went to ICU, International Christian University, right near ASIJ. And then at that point, I'd finally found my focus, which was language. Because when I'd been in ASIJ, they hadn't encouraged me to speak or learn Japanese. So that was one of the ironies. I came from Australia, and I'd been told that my guidance counselor, believe it or not, I've never completely forgiven her, but she said, "Well, you've been studying French in Australia. You're going to be graduating in a couple of years.
yeah.
The colleges in America, they probably wouldn't accept Japanese as a credit. It won't help you it won't help you in the future at all. So you should, you have to study, keep doing French." So I started French in the SIJ when I was there. But then maybe maybe that kind of triggered something in me because I wanted to study Japanese. So when I finally got my footing, I guess in my sophomore year, I took a couple classes in Santa Barbara. And then when I went back on the year abroad program, I was totally into it,
Mm,
totally into it. So I took the intensive course in ICU at the time, which was truly intensive. It was like, all day long, every day kind of thing, and a lot of homework. And then when I finished that, I realized I wanted to study more, so I extended.
yeah.
And then I was able to graduate almost on time,
Mm,
which was unusual. And then I sort of, the times were the times, and I sort of knocked around as a hippie for a while. And then I was a tour guide in LA for a while,
mm,
and I had this kind of bohemian lifestyle. And then I thought, well, I need to do something,
mm.
something a little different. So I applied for a foreign ministry, a scholarship, and I went back to ICU on
Oh,
a foreign ministry scholarship
yeah.
for a year and a half
Mm,
to study, again to ICU, specifically to study interpreting and translation. And then when I graduated from, or not graduate, when I finished my study program at ICU, it wasn't a graduate program per se. I could design my own program. And then in 1978, I came back to the States. And ever since then, I've been a freelancer. And I worked as a written translator, interpreter, and writer. And
I mean, I just find that incredibly inspiring, though, that first of all, I love the irony that ASIJ you were in Japan and we're learning French. But it's
Yeah.
very inspiring that someone can like, I think Chomsky, right, said something about, the critical period of like language acquisition, right, is until age 12 or something. But then you have people
Yeah.
like you. My father also didn't start doing Japanese until I think he was in his latter teens, and you guys have, become
Yeah.
masters of the language. Going back to ICU, and this kind of connects to the whole interpreter versus, you've done various types of translation, but people know you most through your connection to manga. And your first manga was, or I should probably ask you, what was it? Was it the manga that was given to you when you were at ICU? At least that's what my research says. Yeah.
Mm. When I was at ICU, I was studying Japanese really intensively, and then I started reading manga because a lot of my the first year I was at ICU, I was in a dormitory,
Mhm.
and my Japanese roommates were reading these, fat weeklies
Mhm.
and manga magazines, and instead of textbooks, and it was kind of like rock and roll in the United States. I
Mhm.
think for young people, manga were kind of in college then. It was kind of a badge of pride to say, hey, I'm reading comic books, that kind of thing. And so when I was trying to learn, um, I was trying to learn living, speaking Japanese, and manga were really helpful. So I started reading the magazines, and then um, I'm just, I'm actually, this is all coming back to me now because um, a friend of mine, Okada Shuichi, who was a dorm mate, he later became a JAL pilot, but
Mhm.
he came over to my place once when I had moved out of the dorm, and he said, "Oh, you got to read this, Fred." He said, "This is the Phoenix," and it
Mhm.
was in Japanese. It's the Hinotori by Tezuka Osamu,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think at the time there were only 5 volumes out, maybe 4 or 5 volumes out, because Tezuka was still drawing it, and I had never seen anything like that or read anything like that, and
Yeah.
I just thought, wow, here there are people in Japan, they're using the comic book medium to try and um, do what other people in other countries are doing with film and novels. And, I was just blown away. So I have a long involvement with that particular manga. And
Yeah, well, you went on to translate it, right? And that's so
yeah, I did.
crazy
Yeah.
that you were a fan first, or like a
Yeah.
reader, and then you actually became professionally involved. Well,
Yeah. And, no, it's really interesting because I'm involved with that right now because that series is well, it will be republished soon. Um,
really?
because the first American publisher, they
Mm,
let go of the paper rights, I guess. So that the rights to the translation and the story have moved to another publisher in New York, Kodansha USA. So they're just starting to work on reissuing another version or another edition of the Phoenix series. Um, and in the late 70s, around 1977, myself and a good friend of mine, Jared Cook, who's has a very similar career to me, except he got involved in producing commercials for Japanese TV instead of spending all of his time translating. But he and I and two Japanese friends around 1977, we approached Tezuka Productions
mm.
along with we had two Japanese members, but we formed this little group called Dadakai,
I
and we
have that in
proposed.
my notes. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, sure you
1977.
do.
Yeah.
But we proposed
Mm.
along with we had two Japanese members, but we formed this little group called Dadakai,
Mm.
and
I
we
have that in
proposed.
my notes. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, sure you
1977.
do.
Yeah.
But we proposed
Yeah.
to Tezuka Productions that they let us translate the Phoenix,
Mm.
and uh, and we wound up meeting Tezuka, and then we did translate 5 volumes, and that was the first work that I actually translated, but it wasn't published. It took 25 years to get that published.
Wow. Why did
Yeah.
it take so long for it to get?
Uh, in America, people just were not interested in Japanese comics then.
Mm,
And, it's totally different than today. Now, American kids, everybody knows manga, anime, that sort of thing. And in 1977, 1978, most Americans were still not eating sushi. It was just a totally different world.
yeah.
So we didn't have any luck getting that published. Jared and I also worked on the second volume of Hadashi no Gen, Barefoot Gen, and
Yep.
that was published, but that was part of a volunteer effort. There were other translators involved in the first volume and subsequent volumes, especially my friend Alan Gleason, who's also a ASIJ graduate.
Mm,
But Hadashi no Gen was printed up, translated by volunteers, and then shipped mainly to volunteer groups in the United States that were involved in the anti-nuclear movement,
mm.
churches, and that kind of thing. So a very different kind of world, Um, it wasn't published. It wasn't printed in the United States. It was printed in Japan and shipped to the United States, and it was a really a volunteer effort. So for 25 years, it was very hard to get Americans interested. And there's so many weird aspects of manga in the United States that uh, I'm always surprised that there hasn't been more research done on it because
Mm,
for the first, I guess, almost 15 years, all the manga that were translated into English had to be published in the United States so they could be read from right to left.
mm.
I mean, from left to right, American style.
Wow.
So in other words,
Yeah.
you need mirror images of all the pages
Oh, yeah.
because the belief was that Americans would never read anything backwards. And now it's incredible because I look at my grandchildren, my honorary grandchildren, and they they read stuff right to left. They read stuff left to right. They don't care.
Mm,
Uh, I have a friend who calls this. She referred to this as a sort of a neuroplasticity,
mm,
and I think it's true. And the big shock to me has been to find out that American kids are actually much more flexible than Japanese kids are. Because
interesting.
in Japan, there's been a lot of attempts to introduce American comic books
Mm,
from left to right. Um, but the market in Japan has not really accepted that. And generally in Japan, people are not really interested in foreign comics very much. I mean, recently there's some Korean artists, some Taiwanese artists who, they do okay. But it's been really hard in the Japanese market for French or American comic book artists.
do you know why? Is it just because there's already so much, the market's so saturated?
Yeah, I think, kids in Japan, they've been surrounded. I mean, things are changing now because we're switching out of paper manga into more digital manga, that kind of thing.
Mm,
But kids are so conditioned, and not only kids, but also adults, up until their 50s and 60s are reading manga in Japan right now, and they're so conditioned to reading from right to left with a very unique Japanese pacing
mm,
and storytelling techniques. So it's hard for them, often American comic books in the early days, when I say early days, I'm talking about, even 30 years ago, when people were trying to, or 50 years ago, maybe they're trying to introduce something like Spider-Man or Superman. Usually the American comics were too wordy
mm,
and you couldn't read them fast like you can Japanese manga. They're a different style.
mm.
And I think people had trouble with that.
That question I wanted to throw at you sometime in the interview, and I think maybe this is a good chance to, speaking of translation, is there's goingo, right? Like onomatopoeias in
Yeah,
Japanese, like doki doki, like,
yeah,
gaku
yeah,
gaku.
yeah.
When you translate like goingo, right, onomatopoeias, what are there any that have been really difficult to kind of bridge across those two languages?
The onomatopoeia, in Japan, always people always say, "Oh, you couldn't possibly translate, doki doki and stuff like that." But actually, English is pretty flexible, and there's usually ways to get around it. The real challenges are when you have when you have a visual pun.
Mm,
So the text is linked to the drawing, and there's a pun involved in the drawing. And I sometimes give an example in the Astro Boy series that I translated in the early 2000s, beginning of the 2000s. There's this one scene where this kid, there's a dog, and it's a robot dog, and he tells him in the final panel of the page, he says, "Roll over,"
mm,
and the dog starts to roll over. But in Japanese, the kid says, "Omaari," which
mm,
means roll over, right?
mm.
This is a Astro Boy by Tezuka, who always liked to throw in gags, even when he didn't need them. He just liked to do this. So you turn
Yeah.
the page, and suddenly the kid's school teacher, instead of the kid's school teacher who's been in this little sequence, there's a policeman
Mm,
appears. The reason the policeman appears is because in Japanese, "Omaari-san"
yeah.
is word for policeman, but
Oh, that's really
it
hard.
also it's a
Yeah.
great gag. It's a great visual gag, and I struggled with this, and I struggled with it. And it's one of the few times in my life where I was actually able to find a translation that worked because
Yeah.
I said, I had the policeman, I changed what he says, and instead of Omari, suddenly you have a policeman. The policeman says, "You called,"
Yeah.
and it works, and in a weird way. But in the English, in the final panel where the boy says to the dog, "Roll over," in English, I have him say, "Roll over, please." And then in the next panel on the next page, you have the policeman, and he
Yeah.
says, "You called," and it kind of works because police sounds like police, right? So
Yeah, yeah. That's
that's how it
clever.
works. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, a lot of times you just can't translate it. So then you either have to, think of some other joke or something, or just skip it. Yeah.
I love that. I'll remember that. Police.
Yeah.
Police, police. It's like being a rapper almost, having to figure out what fits in. So I want to switch gears a bit and talk to you a little bit about your career in regards to the books you've written, and how we were just talking about off air. There's kind of a general pattern about just this cross-cultural, and I think it's interesting because researching you, I think the word bridge is really appropriate. And actually, there's a bridge right behind you right now, how you've always sort of bridged, right, Japan and the US. Like what, I guess the question for you would be like, when you write these books, is there like a specific theme, or like, is there a message behind all these books that like connect, or would you say each one of these are very kind of different in regards to what you want the reader to take home?
I think the connection is that there's always something that I wish people knew more about, or I want to share my enthusiasm about, and there's things that I think that are not well known. In the beginning, it was manga. Certain people know all about manga now, so I don't see myself writing a general book about manga again. That's not necessary now. But I've always been fascinated also by, for example, individuals who sort of disappeared from history. They're
Mm-hmm.
not known, and they did something extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been a theme for at least two of my books. And then, I wrote about robots in Japan, and that was partly driven by my interpreting work. It may seem weird, but uh, at that point in history, and that book came out around 1987, I think. At that point in history, Americans thought that Japan was eating their lunch,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of my interpreting work, which is how I actually made a living for most of my life, a lot of my interpreting work involved going around factories and interpreting for Japanese engineers and that sort of thing. Uh, actually, all around America at one point, and then also especially in Silicon Valley, and it so. my motivation in writing about robots was kind of driven by this desire to make people think about a little known aspect, what was a relatively little known aspect of Japanese development at that point. And the robot was really sort of a metaphor for being able to talk about culture and technology. And I wanted to just share some of the things that I had experienced indirectly
Mm,
uh, as an interpreter. That was a big motivation. And some of the other books, it's just I find some story or I hear of some person in history who I
mm,
think, wow, they did something just amazing. Why aren't they better known? And I become obsessed with the story and hopefully getting more people, helping more people get interested in it. And my most recent book was actually about the Heart Sutra, which is a Buddhist sutra. And
mm,
it's very different because I'm not focused on, uh, one individual per se, but it's about this, just my personal fascination with this one sutra. I'm not a religious person at all,
mm,
but I have a sort of a fetish for the Heart Sutra, you might say. And it was about my own, um, just my own curiosity. Where did this thing come from? Why is it so popular in East Asia? What does it mean? And so forth and so on. So the motivation is always different, but I often find something that I think is not very well known, and I'd like to know more about it. I become obsessed with it,
mm.
and I hope that other people would maybe share my obsession, I guess. But I'm a very niche author. I don't. I'm really not that well known, and my books don't really sell in the millions, or anywhere near the millions. But I I've been very fortunate in my life. I've been able to write books as almost like a personal quest, I guess.
I think as we kind of conclude the podcast, I wanted to do two more things with you. One was circle back to kind of the AI and robots, because I think it's very
Yeah, yeah,
apt. I mean, you're right in the midst of it, right? You're in the Northern California area where
yeah.
a lot of that's
I'm,
happening. And
I'm in the midst of it. Yeah,
just a quick rapid fire at the end. But yeah, when it comes to robotics and AI, I mean, I know they're not synonymous, but there is definitely an overlap. And you've written before how you feel like in Japan, so I'm just going through my notes here. You feel like um, people in Japan kind of have less of a antagonistic sort of approach towards robotics. And you feel like part of that could be based on sort of how the West has portrayed, right? Robots versus the East has. With the West, you have kind of this framing of artificial life being Frankenstein, right? It's hubris. And then on the other end, in Japan, kind of robots is like, yay, the future. So like, I was wondering if you could, I mean, I guess confirm if that is true and if you want to expand on that a bit more.
well, I wrote my book on robots, as I mentioned, using robots as a metaphor to talk about culture and technology. And at that time, the world was very different, and Japan had a huge advantage in robotics in the sense of what Japanese call mechatronics,
Hmm.
which is more hardware focused. And there was one roboticist in America who made a big impression on me. His name was Victor Scheinman, and he was running a robotics company. And he said, in the end, software wins.
Well,
And even though I think Japan is much more receptive on many levels to the idea of robots, just because of popular culture and also maybe other factors, maybe religion, who knows, all kinds of other things.
hmm.
Um, but unfortunately, robotics in Japan are really taking a back seat.
Hmm.
And it's kind of sad, actually, for me, as somebody who's, um, I was very attracted to this aspect of Japanese culture. But
Hmm.
uh, I think because of software,
Hmm.
Japan Japan got behind in software, and the software is a big component of robotics. When we're talking about robotics today, maybe software is the most important component.
Hmm.
It's been fascinating to see how Japan has slipped in this regard.
Hmm.
But I do notice that when I was in Japan in March, the taxis in Tokyo,
Hmm.
you have to sit and watch these videos in the back seat of a taxi in Japan today, and
Yeah.
the the ads for AI were just so overwhelming.
Mm,
Uh, but it's really only taxis and ads on TVs and that kind of thing. I
yeah.
don't think people are using AI yet the level they are in the United States. And here, I think also maybe historically in the West, um, people have a valid reason to be a little bit afraid of
Mm.
technology
Yeah.
because in the Industrial Revolution, workers in the West were really victims of
Mm,
what happened. Uh, they were part of this grand experiment, and that may be happening again. And I think
mm,
even though Americans seem to be glommed onto this AI thing, it's from a very different perspective than in Japan. In Japan, it's more like a catch-up thing. We don't want to be left out, with that sort of
mm,
thing. Here, there's so much money being invested in AI, and so many people think they can make a lot of money out of AI.
mm.
Uh, but there's also a legitimate fear. You know, they talk about the AI job apocalypse, and if you
Yeah.
read the newspapers, you can see that it's possible that we're just on the precipice of that right now. There's a lot of new layoffs happening because
I think like a lot of us bilinguals for the longest time, whether it was, a large part, in fact, your career, right, or my father's career was very contingent on, but for a lot of us, even if it's partially, right, whether we're in law or consulting, that was always, I felt like a weapon, right? Here's an ability I have. Like when I joined my first company, I had certain translation jobs. And from your view as a professional, how have you seen like AI's translation evolve in the last few years? Like, what is your perspective in regards to the quality, and like how have you seen it change the industry when it comes to translating in general?
I don't do that much commercial translation right now, so I'm maybe not the best person to talk to, but I've used AI. I use AI. I use it mainly as a reference.
Mm,
I don't use AI as it is.
mm,
Uh, it is not quite at the level where you can just put a novel into AI and it'll come out the way
mm,
you want it. It'll make up things.
yeah.
It'll put paragraphs in the wrong order. It'll say things that were not in the original at this point.
Mm,
But but having said that, my book on the Heart Sutras this year, I think it's going to come out in Chinese, and it's
mm.
translated by my brother-in-law.
Wow.
And it was really interesting. My brother-in-law is a very literate man in Taiwan. He's 90 years old, but very literate, very wise person. And I don't, I only speak Chinese at the level of a 3-year-old, so I can't evaluate, whether his translation was good or not. But my wife's, one of her old childhood friends who is fluent he's Chinese American, I grew up in Hong Kong. He's fluent, and I asked him if he could do just a spot check of my brother-in-law's translation. And this is a couple of years ago.
Mm,
And he said, "Well, just for your reference, Fred, I'll run a few paragraphs through ChatGPT."
yeah.
And then he sent it to me. So in other words, I'm looking at a back translation from Chinese of my own text.
Yeah.
And I read these paragraphs and I knew immediately it's all over. I mean, the future
It's
for professional translators is
yeah.
it's not going to be what it was.
Mm. As
The
in, you just found it very impressive.
It was very impressive. My first thought was this is even better than my original English, you know. So
No way.
I, I really thought it's all over. And today I don't think it's all over yet,
Mm,
but for a lot of translation,
mm,
like translation of computer manuals, a lot of legal texts, I mean, forget it. You know,
mm,
there's and I wouldn't recommend anybody becoming a translator today. In the computer business, in technology at least, there's been very little incentive for people to fake
mm,
stuff. There's been very little incentive for people to write false manuals
mm,
or, deliberately jimmy the system somehow.
Yeah.
So the information that's being scraped is very reliable. It's not so reliable when you get to the web because everything in the web is kind of contaminated already.
Yeah.
So
That's true.
yeah, so my books have been 8 of my books have been scraped.
Mm,
I know this,
mm.
and I'm also I use AI, but I'm also party to a lawsuit, a class action lawsuit, which I'll
Oh,
never get any money from. I know,
mm,
but there are many authors who are in my position too, and there are these lawsuits against AI firms
mm.
to recoup some of the money they have made from scraping other people's materials.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I saw a congressional hearing on that, right? Where they were using like Anna's archive or something, right? And they were downloading PDFs or ChatGPT was without even asking, right? The
Yeah, yeah,
human users
yeah.
and wow. I want to jump into now rapid fire questions. For each
Sure, sure.
one, it's gonna ask, or not it, I will ask you, and each one would require just a simple. If you want to add a sentence or two, that's fine, but like I want to try to keep it like 30 seconds per one. First manga to ever make you cry.
Well, I don't know if I physically shed tears, but I know that when I read the fourth volume of Tezuka Osamu's uh, Phoenix series, which is in Japanese it's whole, and in English it's translated as Karma.
Mm,
I was just super, super moved.
mm.
And there have been many instances actually where I've read stories and I felt on the verge of crying, but I can't say that, I burst out in physical tears, but I felt like I might. And that's one of the strengths, I think, of manga.
A series everyone loves that you just don't get. It's also a little controversial, but
Yeah. Um, well, I know in the United States, the work of Takahashi Rumiko was really popular at one point, and that was hard for me to. It wasn't an area that I was particularly interested in, but I was also amazed that it was so popular in English because it's almost impossible to translate the sort of inner jokes and the references. But her works such as Ranma Nibun no Ichi or Ranma One Half was hugely popular in the United States in the early 90s, I'd say mid 90s, that kind of thing.
that's interesting.
Uh,
I didn't realize that Rama was so big.
it
And
was huge, yeah. At all the conventions, everybody was dressed up as, as Ranma, that kind of thing.
manga you have reread the most.
Well, right now, it definitely would be the Phoenix,
Mm,
Tezuka's The Phoenix, because I'm involved in helping this new edition come
mm.
out. Um, I'm also a huge fan of Ghost in the Shell because I translated the manga version of that, and I just love Shiro Masamune's style when
Mm.
he was drawing manga in the early days.
Yeah, when I was reading notes about you, I thought that was really cool because I watched that movie with Scarlett Johansson, right? When that came out, yeah. What did you think of the movie version of it?
Well, both the movie version and also the anime in Japan are very serious.
Mhm.
The original is actually very different in that regard. It has this amazing humor, and that's one of the things I like about the Ghost in the Shell manga. It's got this great humor, and it's very much our world. I mean, it's just this totally surreal world where, somebody might be a cyborg, or they might be, partial robot, or some little mini drone, flies into somebody's ear and blows off their head, that kind of thing. There's this huge background humor that is lost in the live action films and even in the anime created in Japan as well.
Well, that concludes the rapid fire questions, and that
That was
concludes
easy.
our interview. I mean, thank you so much for coming on
Thank
today.
you. Thank
This is
you.
episode 93. And you were saying you were retranslating, right? The Phoenix. So when will that be coming out?
I'm not retranslating it, but I'm working with this new edition this probably going to come out soon, and beyond that, I can't really say because I don't know how much I'm even supposed to say. So, but it's very exciting for me because it's something that I was involved in dating back to 1977. So,
Yeah, that's incredible.
full cycle.
Yeah,
Yeah,
full cycle. And
yeah,
on that note, again, thank you so much for being part of this podcast.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
thank
Thank
you.
you.